This morning, Premier Doug Ford released a statement saying he is considering putting two properties recently extracted from the Greenbelt back in. This comes after the owner of the Ajax properties tried to sell them rather than build the promised homes. Opposition parties are outraged, saying this is an attempt by Ford to hide the harm already done to the Greenbelt. Some of the other lands severed have already been flipped for enormous profits. Well, joining us now with more on this is political analyst Keith Leslie. Keith, Premier Ford seems to be doing what people want in this case, putting the land back in the Greenbelt. Will this move do anything to lessen the impact of the Auditor General's damning report? It said some developers got preferential treatment.
Absolutely not in the long run. I mean, when you have the auditor's report saying that certain developers not only were writing government policy, essentially, they got to handpick the Greenbelt lands that they wanted, and those lands were then given to them or freed up for development. So that's why we're seeing Premier Ford pivot to anti-developer Doug all of a sudden. He doesn't give two hoots about the builders, he says. He's much more concerned with, making sure that this land is either developed for housing or gets put back into the Greenbelt. It's an interesting pivot, but I mean, some of these same developers were at his daughter's wedding, for goodness sakes. This whole file still stinks, so I don't think putting these two parcels back into the Greenbelt is anywhere near enough to satisfy the critics on this particular file.
Well, speaking of critics, opposition parties are demanding that all lands freed up for development be returned to their previous protected status. Is that likely to happen?
I don't think Premier Ford is going to back down on this unless he's absolutely forced to, for example, by an RCMP investigation, or perhaps if some PC MPPs, his backbenchers, get fed up with all the blowback they're taking, these charges of corruption. If they get fed up with them and say, it's time our government at least acted on the Auditor General's recommendation to review these particular lands and maybe put them back in. It's his easiest way out of this whole mess, but I think it may be too late even for that.
So it's not just the Premier who's in the hot seat. The Integrity Commissioner is also looking into Housing Minister Steve Clark's role in all of this. And there's no end to calls for his resignation. Why is Premier Ford protecting Clark? And do you think Clark can survive this?
Well, I think the Integrity Commissioner's report that's due somewhere around the end of September, early October, is going to be key to Steve Clark's future. I think really, why not wait until that report, which is likely to be highly critical of Minister Clark? You can't fire him twice, so ride it out now. The legislature's not sitting. He's not going to call a public inquiry. He's not calling the House back. Ride this out, and then, if the report is really damning, then get rid of Mr. Clark. But in all likelihood, I think he'd just do a cabinet shuffle and maybe shuffle Minister Clark out of housing, but not really demote him in the end.
Interesting point. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much, Keith.